The war on terror is a success for terror. It's begun more than 2 decades ago. On September 2001, President George W. Bush declared a war on terror and told a joint sessions of Congress with the American people that the cause of this conflict is not known, yet its outcome is certain. If the if he meets 20 years later to defeat in Afghanistan a proliferation of military groups across the greater Middle East and Africa, and of ending world-spinning war that, at minimum, has killed about 300 times the number of people murdered in America on 9/11, then give him credit. He was absolutely right. Days earlier, Congress had authorized Bush to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons it determined, planned, authorized, committed, and aided and terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, had versus organizations or persons. By then, it was already evident, as Bush said in his address, that Al Qaeda was responsible for the attacks. But it was equally clear that he had no intentions of conducting a limited campaign. A war on terror begins with Al Qaeda, but it does not end there. And now it will not end until every terrorist group's global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated. Congress has already assented to whatever the president saw fit to do. It has voted 422 one in the House and 98 in the Senate to grant an authorizations for use of military force that would give him and President two comes essentially free hand to make war around the world. Believe that it's broad enough for the president to have the authority to do all the needs to do deal with this terrorist and attack and threat, Syrian minority leader Chant Lodge said at the time. I also think that it is time tight enough that the constitutional requirements and limitations are protected. That AUMF would, however, quickly become a blank check for boundless war. In the 2 decades since that 2001, authorization for use of military force has been formally involved to justify counterterrorism operations, including ground combat, airstrikes, detentions, and the support of partner militaries in 22 countries. According to a new report by Stefanian Sabel of Brown University Cost of War Projects, during that same time, the member of terrorist groups trading in Americas and American interest has, according to the U.S. State Department, more than doubled. Under that, AUMF US troops have conducted missions across 4 continents. The countries in question, including some of little surprise like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and a few unexpected nations like Georgia and Kosovo. In many cases, the executive branch inadequately describe the full scope of US actions. Right 7, noting the regular invocations of vague language, pretzel, pretzels. If you want to buy a house, a 20% down payment has been the traditional deal. To buy an endless war on terror in 2001. However, less than 1% was all we needed. Since that initial installment, our costs have increased to about $5.8 trillion. This is going to be a very nasty enterprise. Obi continued. This is going to be a long fast on both counts. He was dead on 20 plus years later. According to the cost of war projects, close to 1 million people have been killed in direct violence during this country's ongoing war on terror. Over those 2 decades, that AUMF has also been invoked to justify detention operations at Guantanamo Bay, Cooper efforts at a counterterrorism hub in African nations of Djibouti to support the Turks in Somalia and Yemen, and ground missions or airstrikes in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, and Yemen. The authorizations has also been called to justify support for partners and armed forces in 13 countries. The line between support and combat can, however, be so thin as to be functionally non-existent. In October 2007, after the Islamic State ambushed US troops in Niger, one of the 13 AUMF support nations, killing for American soldiers and wanting to others, US Africa Command claimed that those troops were merely providing advice and assistance to local counterparts. Later, it was revealed that they had been working with the Nigerian force under the umbrella of Operation Juniper Shield, a wide-ranging counterterrorism effort in Northwest Africa until better they prevented it. In fact, they are left to support another group of American commanders trying to kill or capture Islamic State's leader downtown Chief was part of an port known as Obsidian Noman II. Obsidian Noman is in fact a 1273 program named for the Budgetary Authority Sections 127 of the title to the use code that allows special operations forces to use select local troops as surrogates in counterterrorism missions running either veteran Special Operations Command, the secretive organization that controls the Navy's SEAL Team 6, the Army Delta Force, and other elite special missions of a more generic threatening special operation forces. Its special operations have encompassed local commanders in the field across the African continent in the operation indistinguishable from combat. The US military, for instance, ran a similar 127 counterterrorism efforts, condemned Obsidian Mosaic never Mali. As 7 years, no administrative has ever actually ceded the 2001 AUMF when it comes to Mali, but both Trump and Biden refer to providing counterterrorism support to African and European partners in that region. Meanwhile, Sever also notes investigative journalists reveal incidents in which US force engaged not just in support activities in Mali, but in active hostilities in 2015, 2017, and 2018, as well as imminent hostilities via the 127E program in 2019. And Mali was only one of the 13 African nations where US troops were combat between 2013 and 2017, according to retired Army Brigadier General Don Baltu, who served as African Command and have headed Special Operations Commands Africa during those days. In 2017, the Intercept exposed the tortures of prisoners at the Coronia military base that was used by US personnel and private contractors for training missions and drone surveillance. That same year, Cameroon was seated for the first time under the 2001 AUMF as part of the force to support city operations. It was according to Valtrio, yet another nation saw US troops saw combat. American forces also fought in Kenya at Brown. American forces also searched for in 2011, however, during Operation Odysseus and Dawn and NATO missions that succeeded it, Operations Unfield Protect, the US military and its other air forces flew short against the military of them, Libya autocrat Muammar Gaddafi, leading to his death and the end of his regime. And altogether, NATO repeatedly conducted around 9,700 strike sorties and dropped more than 7,700 precision guided munitions between March and October 2011. In fact, US drones flying from Italy regularly stalked the skies about Libya. Our Predator shot 243 Hellfire missiles in the 6 months of Operation Unified Protector, over 20% of the total of Hellfire spent in the 14 years of the system deployment. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Gary Peppers, the commander of the 324 Expeditionary Reconnaissance Squadron during Operations Unified Protector, told the Intercept in 2018. Despite those hundreds of drone strikes, not to mention attacks by manned aircraft, and Obama administrators argued as 7 years that the attacks didn't constitute hostilities and so did not require AUMA citation. The war for terror. In the week of 9/11, 90% of Americans are bearing forward. Representing Gerald Nadler was one of them. Must prosecute the war that has been thrust upon us with resolve, with fortitude, with unity until the evil terrorist groups that are waging war against our country are eradicating from the face of the earth, he says. More than 20 years later, Al Qaeda still exists, its affiliates have multiplied. And harsher and deadlier ideological successors have marched on multiple continents has put political parties, rushed the United States into a forever war that globalized the death and suffering Al Qaeda meted out on 9/11. Only Representative Varvarali stood up to Earth's restraint. Our country is in a state of mourning. She explained. Some of us must say, let's step back for a moment. Let's just pause, just for a minute, and think through the implications of our actions so that this does not spiral out of control. When the United States was defeated in Afghanistan last year, the war on terror continues to spiral elsewhere around the world. Last month, in fact, President Biden informed Congress that the US military continues to work with partners around the world with particular focus on Africa and the Middle East, and has deployed forces to conduct counterterrorism operations and to advise, assist, and accompany security forces to select foreign partners on counterterrorism operations. In his letter, Biden acknowledged the troops' continued detention operations at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and support counterterrorism operations by the armed forces of the Philippines. He also assured Congress and the American people that the United States remains positive to address terrorists in Afghanistan, continues its ground missions and airstrikes in Iraq and Syria, has forces deployed to Yemen to conduct operations against Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ISIS. And they're on Turkey to support counter ISIS suppression. Around 90 troops deployed to Lebanon to enhance the government's counterterrorism capabilities. And has sent more than 2,100 troops to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to protect United States forces interest in the region against hostile actions by Iran and Iraq backed, as well as approximately 3,150 personnel to Jordan to support counter ISIS operations, to enhance Jordan's security and to promote regional stability. In Africa, Biden noted US forces based outside Somalia continue to counter the terrorist threat posed by ISIS and Al Shabaab and necessity for of Al Qaeda to airstrike incident to Somali partners and are deployed to Kenya support counterterrorism operations. They also remain deployed in Djibouti for purposes of strengthening for counterterrorism and counter-piracy operations, while in the Lake Chad Basin and the Sahel US trough. So that is the Hong Kong's gap push. That bank check now owed $5.8 trillion and counting. He said that the outcome of the war on terror was already certain. 20 years later, it is certainly that the President and the Congress, Representative Barbara Lee Saad, had it all wrong. As 2020 begins, the Biden administration has an opportunity to end decades long mistakes by begging forced to replace sunset or reveal that 2001 AUMF or Congress could step up and do so on its own. Until then, however, that same blank check remains in the effect. All the tab for the war on terror as well as its AUMF fuel toll in human lives continues to rise. Thank you all.